talk to a fairly lengthy paper that is available online. So hopefully people, if they haven't had a chance to look at it yet, might do so in the next couple of days so we can have further conversations on it. The paper deals with the political economy of capitalist development in the latest and still ongoing phase of this development, which we can characterize as neoliberalism, globalization, financialization, labor exploitation, according to Raoul, as well as extractivism, both in its classic and new forms. The focus of the paper is on developments that have unfolded most particularly in South America over the last and preceding 2 decades of capital development within the institutional and policy framework of what was in the 80s conceived of as a new world order, denoting a set of rules designed to govern international relations, trade and investment, and imposed on governments as the price of admission into this new world order, which is, as we all know, presented as the only way forward in Thatcher's celebrated phrase, "there is no other way." This now no longer new neoliberal world order was designed as a means of liberating what George W. Bush Jr. in his National Security Strategy September 2012 presented as the forces of economic freedom. That is the private sector understood in terms of large-scale multinational enterprises. To liberate these enterprises from the regulatory constraints of the welfare development state. This was the so-called Washington Consensus on the virtues of and the need for a system of free market capitalism to reactivate the development or accumulation process, and for countries in the region and elsewhere to be integrated into this process, to structurally adjust their economies to its requirements, and conform to the dictates and rules of trade between and among nations, which were later codified by the World WTO, established in 1994 and functioning since January 1, 1995, precisely 1 year after NAFTA took effect. While the driving force of the capitalist development process in this view, in this conception, the driver of the economic growth engine is the so-called private sector, international trade is viewed as the engine itself. Hence the emphasis in the new economic model on the need to reorient national production towards the global market, freed of course from the regulatory constraints, as well as the promotion of exports to this market. The adjunct to this strategy was the promotion of free trade, a policy crystallized in the formation of free trade agreements such as NAFTA, which, as I said, took force in January 1, 1994, and designed to integrate the 3 economies of North America into one free trade area. This free trade project was extended some 10 years later, 8 to be exact, in the form of the free trade area for the Americas, the FTAA, a project that was defeated by the forces of anti-imperialist resistance in the region, as well as the opposition of some governments like Brazil, which was concerned to integrate the global economy, but not within the framework of the existing system. It also took form as a series of free trade agreements signed by the US subsequently with governments that are aligned with it and supportive of the rules of neoliberal governance. This is part of the bilateralization strategy of trade negotiations that Norman spoke of, pursued by the US state. In the current context, this implicates governments that now constitute the Pacific Alliance, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. Above all, Colombia and Mexico, both of which are the linchpins of the neoliberal model based on what was once described as the Washington Consensus, now dubbed by The Economist as the Davos Consensus. Now, I have no time, of course, to describe the policy and political dynamics involved, so I'll get straight to the point of the paper, that this model is one of 3 that are now contesting the policy space within which governments in the region are working and designing their strategies of national development and their trade regimes and policies. A second model, another model, is associated with what has been described as the post-Washington Consensus on the need for a more inclusive form of development based on the, quote, inclusionary activism of the state. Not the development state of the 60s and 70s, but, quote, a better balance between the state and the market, achieved by continuing to pursue a strategy of structural reform designed for integration into the global economy, but adding to it a new social policy designed for poverty reduction. So that is a policy of social inclusion and direct economic assistance to the poor, extending social programs of the government to the rural communities to help these communities adjust to the forces of change, provide an option to out-migration by by supporting a strategy of diversifying household incomes, which will then allow them to resist, as I said, the need to migrate to the cities and beyond. In the development discourse, this is referred to as local or community-based development, in which the poor are empowered to act for themselves, as well as take responsibility for both their poverty and development. The adjunct to this model is a strategy of open regionalism or interregional trade, economic integration on the basis of a trade agreement that incorporates a series of extra commercial development considerations, so that trade serves not only as the means of integrating to the global economy and expanded regional integration, but regional development as well as regional integration. The best expression of this, institutional expression of this, is Mercosur, an arrangement that brings together Argentina and Brazil, as well as Uruguay and Paraguay. The third alternative model is still very much in construction, if not in the air. It is associated with a strategy and policies implemented by a number of left-leaning, ostensibly progressive regimes, post-neoliberal regimes, formed in the wake of a wave of anti-neoliberal sentiment in the 90s, generated by powerful social movements directed against the neoliberal agenda of governments at the time. And these are movements that have their social base in the peasantry as well as indigenous communities, for the most part. These are post-neoliberal regimes that are formed in the most recent context an anti-imperialist axis, if not an alliance, oriented toward what Hugo Chavez termed the socialism of the 21st century, which is directed not only towards moving beyond neoliberalism, but against capitalism itself. The economic model associated with this politics of resistance is a work very much in progress, but the fundamental principles, which we do review in the paper, are abundantly clear. There is, in fact, an emerging third consensus, what we might term a radical consensus, on fundamental principles elaborated in diverse forums of resistance, in which the social movements in the region are playing a major role. Forums that bring together many different forms of resistance and opposition, not only to neoliberalism, but extractivism and other so-called forces of change and development. This radical consensus is associated with, or is taken the form as ALBA, which we will know is a system that brings together a third group of countries and a trading bloc, which includes Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Ecuador, as well as Nicaragua and several Caribbean island states. Again, I don't have any time. I want to leave a few minutes so I can trade some minutes with some of my colleagues. But in the paper, I review and but in the paper itself, I review and comment on some of the policy and political dynamics involved and the forces engaged in the forces of capital development in South America today. Forces, as I said, that are mobilized around three alternative models of development and trade in different directions, that push for change in different directions. And in the context of, as I said, and as Ricardo pointed out, a return of a number of these regimes in South America towards extractivism, the so-called new extractivism. Well, that's how it's termed in Latin America, which also has a profound effect on the structure of trade, because it tends to promote trade on the global, or even like south-north, as well as south-south in terms of the BRIC countries, or China, rather than an intra-regional axis. The problem is to gauge and determine the correlation of forces in this development process, to see what are the forces behind and supportive of development process, and the model that is used to mobilize action and policy in one direction or another. But it's very difficult to determine precisely what the correlation of forces behind these three models is at the moment, or therefore the outcome, the likely outcome. This is no easy matter, and I do not propose in the paper in any way to get into it. I just pose it as a problem. I'll leave it at that.